Okay, this is a little talk or classroom thing about fertilizers. And you can see we've got all sorts of crazy fertilizers out here. The main thing I want to say is fertilizers aren't really the main focus of bonsai. Fertilizers are only something that we use to achieve a certain goal or a goal that we choose to. Except for the fact that we have trees in a pot. Most trees in nature do not need fertilizer if they're living in an environment where the tree species normally grows. The flora and fauna in the soils themselves, and the minerals in the soil, and the atmosphere itself provide enough nutrients for the trees to survive, even in places that you wouldn't think they survive. A lot of the trees that we collect come from small rock pockets that have very little soil, and we get some phenomenal trees coming out of that. And these trees get no fertilizer. However, in bonsai culture, we've taken trees out of their natural environment, which is whatever it is, where the trees come from, whether they come from a growing field or the mountains, and we put them in these little pots, and we move them from their ability to put roots out into their environment, and for those roots to find moisture, nutrients, and anything else they need. The earth is Gaia, and she provides all those things for the trees and everything that grows. Well, as humans are taking these trees and put them in little pots, and so we're no longer connected to Gaia, or the idea of Gaia. Because of that, we have to add a little bit of fertilizer. And there's lots of ways to do it. We can just buy something like what Danielle uses, these Job's cakes, and put them right on top of the soil. Do that a couple times a year, and that will fertilize the trees very well. Or we can buy something very expensive, like, where to put it? This is called Bio Gold. This is what Ryan uses, and it really is gold. It's extremely expensive. And it really does a really good job of fertilizing trees. Or we can buy any manufactured organic fertilizer, and then apply that to the trees. And all these things work to some degree, and they all have their advantages, and they all have their limitations. Now, what we're really trying to do when we talk about fertilizer, we're talking about four things. We're talking about nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, the NPK. So that the phosphorus and the potassium build roots and build branches and build structure, and the nitrogen itself produces the energy for the tree to grow. So, what are you trying to accomplish with your trees determines how you're going to apply fertilizer, and what you're going to apply, and what types of fertilizer you're going to apply. So that means that we're going to fertilize a tree in development completely different than a tree that we're going to fertilize for refinement. Fertilizer really, from my perspective, if you're just trying to get your trees to grow, it really doesn't matter the source of fertilizer you get. If you're just trying to maintain your trees in a hobbyist type way, and you're trying to just get growth, then it doesn't matter what you put on. The only caveat about that I would say is, if you do that, you want to change up the manufacturer and the type of fertilizer you do, because we don't want the trees to be eating the same things. Because not only does the trees need nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, but they also need trace elements that may or may not be available in a specific brand of fertilizers you're buying. So that's why this other stuff up. We can go back to traditional way that used to talk about fertilizer, and we could go with something like alfalfa meal, which provides mostly phosphorus. We can also add blood meal, which I'm going to try to find out what the thing is, so I'm not lying to you. This is a 1200, so this is a nitrogen supplement. And then the last thing is, we should have some bone meal in here someplace. There's a big package of bone meal, and bone meal is 612 12-0, so it provides potassium, right. The other thing I like to add is a fish meal. This is basically the stink that you normally get with. This stuff that I get, or this is normally the stuff I get, the stuff I used to get I can't get anymore. The stuff I got before didn't stink so bad because it was called hydrolyzed or something like that. I don't know what this is going to do as far as stink. But this adds, it's a 860, so it's nitrogen and phosphorus. But this also, the reason I like to use the fish meal and also the kelp meal is it's derived from the sea and it has a lot of trace elements to it. One of the things I also like to include in my fertilizer mix is some form of organics that will inoculate the fertilizer and in turn inoculate the soil column with fungals, flora and fauna that is beneficial to the soil so we can build up the soil column. And so in reality, by using organic fertilizers, what we're really trying to do is build up a soil structure that has a lot of flora and microscopic flora and fauna in it that actually is what we're feeding, and those in turn are symbiotically feeding the roots and allowing the trees to work. So how do we apply this stuff? This is a teaspoon, and we'd put a piece here, 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 and in 6 weeks we would do it again in the spring, or however long we wanted to fertilize the tree. This tree is a little bit different. It's going into its refinement stage. I don't really want to push it, so I would only put half as much fertilizer in there because I don't want to have a whole bunch of growth. The more you fertilize, the more you're going to grow. If you're trying to control your growth, you want to fertilize less. Okay? So since this tree is going into refinement, I would use half a teaspoon, and I only apply it certain times a year. Now the problem with this method is most of these fertilizers are a powdered form. If you just apply them on top, they're going to clog up the surface of your soil. What I do is I take that same fertilizer and I put it into tea bags, and then I apply that. And it gives me two things to do. Number one, I maintain I no longer get the contamination of the soil on top, but I still get the fertilizer to percolate through the bags, and when I water, the fertilizer will flow into the trees. And you know this works because it's not going to show up in this time, but a lot of times when you pick up these tea bags, the roots will actually be growing in the tea bags. This is especially true for trees that grow really fast, like deciduous trees, elms, and junipers when they're really growing fast. The other thing I like about the tea bags is that it's a visual. I can see where they're at. Okay? And I leave them on there until they basically fall apart. So the next time I put tea bags on, I happen to have some that are already made right here, and I will put them in between. And so I get even distribution of fertilizer all the way across the tree. I do not fertilize all my trees all year long. As a matter of fact, I don't fertilize any of my trees during the hot part of the summer. Like right now, yesterday it was in my house it was 109. That makes the trees are actually shutting down. And remember, I said that these fertilizers are a salt. So what that does is that makes it more. Since the temperature elevations are higher, the tree can't transpire as well, and so the ability for the trees to take up water is slightly diminished. Once the temperatures will drop down to about 75 to 80 degrees on an average, which should be in September sometime, or hopefully by the end of August, hopefully mid-August. Then I'll start applying fertilizer. Now, this sets up the whole conversation about fertilizers in general. I fertilize all my trees starting in the fall. I don't care what they are. It depends how much I put on the trees is depending upon whether the tree's in refinement or development. But in the fall is the most critical time for you to fertilize your trees. The reason for that is that allows the trees to pump up energy so that they can survive the winter. In the winter is when the trees do most of their growth for vascular systems, or in the fall actually. In the fall, not the winter. In the fall, because they're going to take all the energy that's been put up in this new growth and take it and put it into the trunk, the roots, and the branching, and they're gonna. That's when the structural elements of the trees grows the most. So again, starting about mid-August, depending upon the weather, every 4 to 6 weeks I apply fertilizer until I get my first killing frost. And that's when all the leaves are gone and we get really hard freezes, and it depends on where your area is and what the year is, that's when I stop fertilizing. Because once we hit to right around 35 degrees, the roots slow down and no longer can take up the nutrients. However, they still are active and they will take up some. Now there is a thought process out there that you don't want to apply nitrogen to your fall fertilizers. I disagree, because they don't want to flood the tree with nitrogen in the fall, because we don't want to stimulate growth when the tree is actually starting to shut itself down. And the best way I can show you how to do it, this is a tea bag. And this is tedious. And this is something I do when I'm really kind of crazy. Let's see, this is what I buy. I get them online. And this happens to be a teaspoon. I'm just going to use, this happens to be some little alfalfa meal. I'll take a teaspoon of this, shove it into the tea bag. This particular brand of tea bags has a flap. I flip it over, I'll flop it out, and that's what I do if I'm using these. If I'm using something like BioGold, and I use BioGold on some of my finished trees because it's from my experience you can get better. The growth is far more manageable. And then I'll take a teaspoon of that, or I'll count out 4 or 5 and put them right in the soil, same like I do it on the. So I hope that covers everything, because that's about all there is to say. From my perspective, it doesn't really matter what you do on the organics. Anything works. Whatever fits your system and fits your bank account. Matter of fact, most of the stuff I bought just for the demonstration, I buy the cheapest possible organic fertilizer I can get, and then I just tweak some other stuff, try to get some better quality in there, and then follow through, do it. So anyway, that's the end of it. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you guys for being here. Okay, I'm done.